In my previous video, I briefly explained what happens at an early stage of a startup's life. It's common that firms start with venture capital money. Now let's look briefly at what happens later when a firm grows larger and needs even more money. Here, let's say a company is large enough and it decides to sell shares of stock for the very first time, which would bring potential a lot of money for the firm. It can do it two different ways. It can sell it as a public issue or it can sell it as a private issue. Selling as a public issue is also what is known as initial public offering, IPO, or going public, or unseasoned new issue. This means that now the original co-founders of the company are no longer the only owners. They basically sell the company to investors out there who are willing to buy its shares. So the company becomes publicly owned. If the shares of stock are sold as a private issue, it means they're not offered to whoever wants to buy them, but only sold to a specific group of a small group of investors, maybe less than 35 investors. The public issue can further be split into two ways how the stock shares are offered to the investors: general cash offer and rights offer. General cash offer is the most general case when the shares of stock that are being sold by the firm for the first time are, without any conditions offered to investors in the rest of the world. Rights offer means that these financial securities, these original shares of stock, are first offered to the existing owners, the existing co-founders of the firm. And typically they would be purchased at a discount, and then the rest of the shares would be offered as a general cash offer to other investors out there. Now, let's say the company sold the shares of stock for the first time. Time goes by, few years go by, it decides to expand. It needs more money. It wants to buy a competitor, or it wants to expand, open a new office, in a new location, whatever that new investment project may be. So if it wants to sell additional shares of stock, in other words, selling shares of stock for the second time, for the third time, and so on, once again, it can be done two different ways. It can be sold to the general public, called general cash offer, or first offered to the existing stockholders, known as rights offer. And selling shares of stock for the second time, for the third time, is also known as seasoned equity offering. So that's in contrast to IPO, initial public offering. What is the basic procedure of selling shares of stock? Step 1, the management of the firm must first obtain the permission from the board of directors to sell additional shares in the market. Step 2, the firm must file a document known as a registration statement with the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. This Securities and Exchange Commission is kind of a very important agency in this country, which overlooks the entire financial securities market, makes sure there is no fraud, that the company issuing stocks or bonds does exist, those kind of things. Step 3, this Securities and Exchange Commission examines this registration statement during roughly 3 weeks, a 20-day period. During that time, the company is allowed to distribute a preliminary document to its potential stock share buyers. This document, this preliminary prospectus, is known as a red herring. Yes, there are a lot of funny names in finance. If there are any problems in the registration statement submitted to the SEC, then the company has to make any recommended changes and wait for another 20 days before it is allowed to sell any shares. So during this time, it is not allowed to sell any shares to the public. And finally, the selling starts when everything is approved by the SEC.